there can be so much stress at bedtime because it's like we just want them to go to bed because we want our time or we want our space. And we've put all of everything into, if I don't get this 1 hour of wind down time myself as a parent, the world's going to end. And it had to take a lot of kind of acceptance and acknowledgement around this is where we're at. And yeah, it's how do we let go of the need to control what bedtimes look like right now? Because if we can do this for them, it will save us actually time in the long run.
Welcome to the Soaring Child Podcast, where parents of children with ADHD learn tips and tricks to help their child soar at home, at school, and in life. We feature interviews with experts, medical professionals, and parents just like you who are learning how to reduce ADHD symptoms using food and other natural strategies. Because children with ADHD deserve to soar just like every other child. I'm Dana Kay, your host. Hello, parents. This is Dana Kay here with another edition of the Soaring Child Podcast. Before we get started, I want to share a little bit of a story with you. And you know that I tend to share a lot of stories with you. But this one might be one that many of you find familiar. And not too long ago, one of our listeners, Sarah, she actually wrote to us about her nightly battles. And each evening as the house quietened down, Sarah really faced the toughest time with her son, Alex. Her son, Alex, who has ADHD, found it almost impossible to wind down, and his mind raced with excitement, either the excitement of the day or the worries about tomorrow and, the 1,000 what-if scenarios that some reason seem to peak right at bedtime. Isn't always the way. Night after night, Sarah really struggled, trying everything from strict bedtime routines to soothing music, but sleep remained an elusive guest in their house. So any of you listeners today out there dread bedtimes, or do you get anxiety about how to get your kiddo with ADHD to bed? Perhaps they seem hyper, just like Alex did, or stressed just before bed, or maybe they fall asleep, but they can't stay asleep. Don't worry, because we have got you covered today. I'm here with ADHD Thrive Institute's child and family therapist, Ashley Gobeil, and we are going to be talking about these things, the things that can contribute to the difficulties for kids with ADHD falling asleep. So, Ashley, welcome once again to the Soaring Child Podcast.
Hello, welcome. Thank you for having me. As usual, it's always great to be on here.
I love having you. I love our conversations. I love our vibe. I don't even need to introduce your credentials because you've been on so many times now that most of the listeners know exactly who you are. So welcome. Excited for you to be here today.
Yeah, and I'm excited to talk about this. I know parents in the Thrive program and so many parents I work with, just this bedtime continues to be such a hot spot. Yeah. I even know for myself, bedtimes, it could be a very stressful time with kiddos who just, the word that comes up is refuse. And then I know as a parent, we get more and more stressed. And before we know it, we're in this really awful dynamic, as you explained with Sarah.
Yep.
It can be tough, super tough.
It can be really tough. And we know that sleep actually promotes more sleep. And so when they're getting less sleep, it does the opposite. It doesn't give them the time to, really rejuvenate and detoxify and heal. It's so critical to everyone's functioning, but extra critical for our kiddos with ADHD. So Ashley, in your experience, what can get in the way of those peaceful bedtimes?
Yeah. So similar to what you were just saying, like that, the overactive, nervous system is probably one of the biggest ones. So we know kiddos who struggle with those exacerbated ADHD-based kind of symptoms and behaviors, their nervous system is on overdrive a lot of the time. So this means they're in that hyper aroused state, easily activated, and they're just on the go. So they're kind of in that, some of them in that chronic fight or flight mode a lot of the day. Or it doesn't take much to get them up there. So over time, those kiddos, and I've talked about this before on the podcast, their nervous system will actually stay up there it'll actually be really hard for them to come down, or the nervous system doesn't quite trust that they can unwind. So they just stay up here in high alert for most of the day. So then when bedtime comes on, when naturally our parasympathetic nervous system, which is in charge of rest and digest, what you just said, what we absolutely need overnight, is supposed to come online, it just doesn't. It just is not coming online for them. So, and that can depend on lots of things, their stress levels throughout the day, depending on their inflammation levels. And it's like, we need to be able to bring on that other part of the nervous system that kind of tells the body and the mind, hey, it's time to wind down. We need to move into healing. We need to move into rest. And it's like their physiological state just can't move into that. Or I've seen, and I've talked to parents where it's like they'll be hyper before bed and then just crash. And so it's actually not even a true regulated state as well. Like they just move into total flop, total crash, and then like just sleep, in this other kind of unrestful sleep, if that makes sense.
Totally. Because a lot of our kids will crash, but they're not getting that rejuvenative sleep that they actually need. And I can tell you, my son used to be the same. And interestingly, his was a load of different things, parasites and bacterial overgrowth and inflammation and all of that sort of stuff. But he also had underlying sleep apnea, and he was just so exhausted that he would, crash at sleep time, but it was dead to the world, but wasn't getting the rest that he needed, the proper rest that he needed.
Yeah, it's like they're not going to that restorative state in the body overnight. Yeah. Another huge reason I see a lot in the program and with parents is separation anxiety and anxiety. So, which of course connects to that physiological hyper state. But a lot of kiddos, when they've had stressful days, weeks, months, and whatever's going on in their family dynamic and how stressed the family relationships are, we can kind of see this spike in separation anxiety, meaning they can be, it's almost like they get a bit scared of being alone and going to sleep at night. And not uncommon for kids who are like developmentally younger than their peers. So we know kiddos with ADHD, well, chronologically, physically, they might be 10 or 11, 12, but we know developmentally they can be quite younger.
They say is it like 3 or so years, I think?
I think it's like 30%. Is that average. They say they can be 30% in particular in the executive functioning, but that overall developmental stage can be a lot younger. So you might have a 10-year-old, but you actually have like a 7.5-year-old when it comes to the emotional maturity at times. So a lot of kiddos will sometimes connection seek before bed. And if you think about it, for a child, bedtime is a point where they have to disconnect in relationships. And actually, for some of them do have to be alone. And if you have this hyper aroused system that can feel really out of control at times, and as we know, a lot of the kids we know, most of the day, they're out of control. And so all of a sudden at bedtime, all of this internal buzz is happening and the expectation is that they go to sleep. So it can actually be like bring on some anxiety and fear for them. And then they want that closeness in their attachment. A lot of kids will say, I want you to lie with me, mama or dad. I want you to hold my hand. I want you to do this. Or they'll avoid bedtime. Like they'll just avoid it at all costs. And the more we end up in those battles, the more stressed everyone gets.
It becomes this vicious cycle, and then they know that they can do it and then they continue to do it. But I totally get that. A lot of the time when we talk about, we hold the keys to our kids' nervous system. And when we think about that, scenario, we're really just going, we're shutting up, we're locking the key, we're throwing it away, we're putting them in a room and completely disconnecting from them. And so like biologically, it doesn't seem right to do that, does it? I mean, I'll be honest, I've never been a co-sleeper. I need my sleep too much to be able to do that. But when you really think about the biological something, whatever that, root is, it seems counterproductive to go put your kid in their room and just shut it off for the night, doesn't it?
And like from a biological, natural perspective.
Yeah.
I remember someone saying to me earlier on when I became a parent going, we didn't have separate caves for our kids.
Yeah.
From, that evolutionary. That was really interesting. But in modern day society, here we are.
Yes.
And so a lot of our children who may not yet have that mastered, that independent sleep yet, or who have mastered being able to wind down their nervous system, they have to have a level of self-regulation. Our kiddos with ADHD who are struggling, they don't yet. They're still growing it. And so, as you said, they almost need to plug into the adult to be the external regulator, to support their nervous system, to start to get some of the messaging that it is safe to lie down and rest and go to sleep. A lot of children as well who struggle with that self-esteem, or they feel really poorly about how their day went, or they're really upset and worried about what's happened in relationships. They'll almost need that more because they may be going to bed with a big sense of insecurity. Even though we know as parents, we love our kids unconditionally. We might not like them sometimes when it's really tough, but kiddos don't know that our love is really unconditional. So they can get really insecure. So then they want us quite close at bedtime. Now, I know there's lots of parents out there who might be going, but I do try to co-sleep, but I lie with them anyway in bed, and it's still like it takes forever. Because there's usually, again, something underlying going on for them. I know for my little one, it used to take sometimes hours until we had worked out a lot of her inflammation and food intolerances and the gut and just, that sort of thing.
It's like inflammation can drive so much dysfunction in the body, including your ability to produce melatonin. I will say, going to go down the nutrition path here, but, serotonin, 95% of that is made in our gut. Serotonin is one of our master, neurotransmitters that regulates our mood, our emotional control. But serotonin is a precursor to melatonin, and melatonin is needed to sleep. So if your gut's broken down, you're not producing the right amount of serotonin. You're also not producing the right amount of melatonin in order to fall asleep. But I'm going to also say to that, that a lot of the times we've got this artificial light that is in our houses. Like if you again take it back to the caves, they didn't have these bright lights in these caves. When the sun went down, they went to bed and they fell asleep. And so that sun going down is actually a cue to our biological body that to start producing more melatonin to then go to sleep. And so if we're artificially keeping that light up at night, then it is much, much harder for our body to produce what it needs to actually, click into that sleep mode. So, I think there's a couple of things there. I will also say one other thing that's really common when we've got sleep issues to sort of an underlying issue is parasites. Parasites come alive at nighttime. And so you could have a kid that, and pinworms, for example, Don't know if many of the listeners out there have dealt with pinworms. I can tell you they've been through our house a number of times. What about you, Ashley?
For fun, yeah, we had them last year for off and on for a couple months, and I can tell you, it was stressful. And our little one, going to bed throughout the day, her mood, it was like she was a different child for weeks.
Yeah.
Until we figured out, and we were like, oh, I think it's worms. Yeah. So it's that activity at night. And often kids won't come and articulate to you the symptoms.
Yeah. They won't know that. They don't understand what's going on, in their body. Well, I don't think I was into my late 20s till I really understood some feelings inside my body. So, how can we expect our little ones to be able to do that? So, look, there's a lot of underlying things that can be contributing, get in the way of those peaceful bedtimes. Was there anything else that you didn't cover off there? We'll talk in a minute about the artificial light because that's such a big one as well. Yeah.
Like our circadian rhythms are just so off the way we live. And another one I wanted to mention is like kids often have a lot of sensory-based needs that don't get met through the day, or movement needs, like we're just not outside as much as possible, depending on how school went. So sometimes they're seeking particular body movements before bed. And I think in a lot of either traditional parenting or just society, we want to shut that down. We tell kids they have to start winding down when actually they're doing the opposite, which I'll talk about because it can be a bit confusing. But yeah, sometimes their body needs to do particular movements. But also just wanting to highlight for some children, if they have, sometimes they do have nightmares or night terrors, or they may also, have things that have happened to them in the past or experiences that also sometimes get in the way of those restful sleeps. And it can be as simple as them being in trouble all the time at school, who then has created these really awful experiences. Yeah. So as I think you mentioned earlier with the mum, Sarah, their little one, just the thoughts, the little monkey mind and all the worries coming up. And it's often the reason why they start coming up before bed is, again, that expectation they need to wind down, and it's like they just want to get it all out.
Yeah, no, I like that you raised that needing to move their body. And I think that, the way that the schooling system is these days is just, it needs to be revamped because, to expect our kiddos to sit down for that amount of time all day, do workbooks and not move their body. Like here in in Australia, it's a little bit better, I will say. Here in the US, I think my 10-year-old, he has literally, a 10-minute break in the morning, and then he has 20 minutes for playtime after he eats his lunch. Okay. I think we used to have 30 minutes in the morning, 30 for lunch, and 30 for in the afternoon. So it's a lot less here in the US, but also they don't do PE, they do PE, I think once, they do it for short bursts, whereas we used to do it multiple times throughout the week, every week for the whole school year. So I just don't think that our kids are getting the opportunity to move their body, and they're just not, they've got to get that out somehow. So I love that you raised that. So, okay, look, there's lots of things that can be contributing to sleep. Hopefully we've given you some things that to start thinking about, could this be it? Could this be it? Actually, what are some strategies that parents can use to really support children to have that restful sleep?
Yeah. So I would start with creating, if some of you haven't yet, that really structured, predictable and consistent bedtime. Yes. And it's kind of I guess some of the strategies we'll go through will also almost be an elimination. It's if you're doing some of them, it might let you know, oh, okay, there's something else underlying. Really starting with a routine that is at least an hour before bedtime, and have those routine markers. I know I've talked about before in the podcast, having rituals, that kind of marks, okay, we're starting our routine, lighting a candle, getting those essential oils diffused, literally turning down the stimulation of the house if we can. I
just want to touch on that briefly. I like how you've said get those essential oils diffused because, smells trigger raw emotions. They trigger a reminder and a response in the body. It's do you remember back in the day when you're in high school and you dated a boy and they wore this perfume, and then every time now, still in my 40s, if I walk down the street and someone's wearing that perfume, it brings me back to when I was in high school.
100%. This is the cool bit of our nervous system, and how memories get stored. They can be linked to sensory experiences. There's still a shampoo that every time I smell it reminds me of camping as a teenager. It's super cool. So if you think about if you're using, and I know sweet orange, lavender, chamomile, those sorts of ones, woody, the sandalwood, grounding. And kids love actually sweet orange is something they can often tolerate. Some kids, especially with ADHD and sensory things, can be a bit kind of go, ooh, some of that might be intense, but that sweet orange seems to be quite a safe one. And that can produce that kind of calmingness in the body. And as you said, if they start to smell it every night for a week, 2 weeks, they know, that wind down is coming. And it's real, like there's a lot of scaffolding that needs to happen for the wind down. Using red light, get rid of the artificial light an hour before bed. No screens, none of the blue light, none of the TV. Look, most of us as adults are super guilty for doing it as well, like screen in our face until we go to bed. In particular for our children, thinking about, can we, for that hour before bed, start to change some of this? We've got red light all over the house now that we try to do for even that 20 minutes to half an hour. I've even got ones in the bathroom now. So it's like if showers or baths happening late, it's in red light just going. And is it right, Donna, that starts to produce some of the melatonin?
Totally.
Oh,
And I will say, and it's funny that you raised that, I actually just interviewed someone on red light therapy, and I don't know if the podcast will be out by the time this goes out or vice versa. So listeners, keep an eye out or an ear out for that particular episode where we dive into red light. But you are so true. And what she was actually suggesting was that, this red light therapy, and I've got some of the panels here as well. She said certain ones you can have in your room at nighttime when, rather than having your bright lights on, use that as the light for nighttime. So you are spot on there. Did you listen to that interview? No.
I know even someone mentioned to us when we were having tricky bits getting little one to sleep that red light can also, I'm thinking from a therapeutic perspective, thought it was cool, can also mimic time again in the womb.
Oh, interesting.
That's like, you think about the light in the red, and it can create a sense of safety for kiddos. So, even if they've got a little red light lamp in their bedroom, it doesn't have to be the lights all off, and it doesn't have to be this bright little, white night light. So, that's really interesting. And even naturally as well, some of the circadian rhythm stuff, there is some really interesting advice around getting outside if you can for even 5 to 10 minutes at sunset or in sunrise. Like, again, that sunrise out of bed.
Yeah.
And is it UVB rays, not the,
Well, I'm not exactly sure on the science behind it, but they do say that getting out in the first thing in the morning resets the circadian rhythm. And again, we talk a lot about the different rays that come from the sun in that podcast.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. So it's like getting out in nature. And if we can get our kiddos, this kind of goes back to the school stuff. They've got so much homework sometimes they get home, but if they can be spending a bit of time in nature outside, super key. The other one being those sensory-based activities and exercises. Doing that in the wind down. A lot of kids who have been, often kiddos who are in fight mode a lot of the day. So, that kind of intensity, they often will need proprioception exercises, which is that deep muscle sensation. So they will need to jump on a trampoline. They might need to be wrapped in that blanket burrito really tightly and then try to break out, as a game. They might need to flop or roll, like flop on the bed, flop on cushions. You might see the kiddo who's trying to like jump on the couch and we're like, no, what are you doing? But it's actually their body trying to go, this is what I need in order to bring on that next part of the nervous system. It might seem counterintuitive, because it's like, oh, they're actually amping themselves up. But some of the kids actually need to be amped up to then slowly come down. And you'll know with some trial and error if that's your kiddo. Most kids who are doing that at night, it's usually what they need.
Yeah.
Or even things like rocking, swaying, swinging can be really good for the kiddo who has been hyper-aroused, but maybe a little bit, when they're really like disorganized, forgetful, and they're kind of off in the clouds a lot, those swaying, swinging, holding them upside down, again, is kind of recalibrating and integrating the nervous system in a way that's really important. Yeah,
I think those are great ideas. And look, we've got a trampoline in the backyard, and I think it's one of the best things that families can buy. Obviously, you want one that has a net and make sure it's safe. But that rebounding is so important for so many different processes in the body. Like, just as you said, getting some of that energy out or recalibrating the nervous system, but also in the morning, to get out to start firing off the neurons in the body and get out some of that energy for that focus when they need to go to school. But then also it helps with detoxification. And so there are many things that a trampoline is great for, especially for our kiddos with ADHD. So using that in the morning and the night you can use it for both times.
Yeah. Like anything that gets them to do some of that heavy lifting, pushing, and as you said, those movements really can be soothing. Yeah. So integrating that into, like you said, everyday practice where you can, even if it's 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Parents are kind of going, where are we going to find time? Just see if you can prioritize 5 to 10 minutes. You mentioned this earlier, Dan, around, how we talk about we hold the keys to our kiddos' nervous system, and our nervous system is so important for theirs. Using our connection and relationship to scaffold and support that wind down. So we can include things like story time, even for older kids, like offering to, sit there and read a book before bed, practice a guided visualization together, or do a mindfulness activity. And no, it doesn't mean they need to lie down and sit still. If they are fidgeting and rolling, that is okay. It could take many, 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 many times for your kid to be able to sit and listen to that story or that guided visualization. That's okay. It's almost like, how do we meet them where they're at? And similar to the essential oils, they know when you go to get that book or you pop on that song or that meditation, they'll start to predict that, this is where I do this. And I sit next to my parent and I lie down and we imagine whatever that visualization is. Because if you think about, that mindfulness, it does take practice. And if you've got a kiddo who's like up here, it's going to take some time.
Yeah. And even like, doing it other times of the day, starting, if you want to bring in something like mindfulness, and I'll say, from my experience, I was never good at it. I was never good at meditating because I just found it boring, and it just, it didn't work for me back in the day. But, I started small. I started 5 minutes a day. I did it at a time where it wasn't so important, that something was happening or I needed to do something. And then I built on from there. And then when you've got those skills, you can then apply it to wind down time at bedtime if you've got one of those kids that just can't deal with it, like I couldn't.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, don't think that you have to put these all into practice. It's like choosing one and practicing that for a couple of weeks and slowly, because it has to be achievable. Because otherwise, if you're a parent and if things are already stressful and you're in overwhelm, like you don't want to add more to your plate, choosing one or two and just giving that a go and practicing it and then building up as you have more capacity. And sometimes that mindfulness can be just done at dinner time where you're getting people to smell, taste, slowly eat, like just bringing that body awareness in. I know, I'm similar. That meditation is really tricky, but if I've got some guided visualization, kiddos it can be that one step a little bit easier where they can just be imagining something. But it takes time.
It totally takes time. But another great thing is like if you as a parent are feeling overwhelmed and you're like, I just can't deal with this right now, find something that the child can do on their own. And I found great success in like adult dot-to-dot books and adult coloring in books because, they're not, obviously if you've got a really super young child, no, but if you've got, a 7 or an 8-year-old, doing the adult dot-to-dots, that's mindfulness. They're literally going from dot to dot to dot to dot. I could go to sleep right now.
You're just doing that.
Yeah. But same with the adult coloring books. They just color. It is a mindful activity. So you could buy a couple of those. And if you just don't have the capacity in yourself to go through that, doing an activity like that, they think it's great. They're doing a coloring in book. They're doing a dot to dot, but it also gives you some time.
Space. Absolutely. Things that also soothe your kiddo's body, using that connection and relationship is when you're lying with them, you can try like 2 things, like just doing some tapping on their forehead, the top of their head kind of like scratches or rubs, especially if you've got a kiddo who loves physical touch and connection is one of their love languages. But some kids, rather than that deep muscle needing to be swaddled and rocked, some actually need what we call like that soft touch. They need the stroking of the arm or, their head, their face. And there's actually some research that show if you're doing kind of stroking of the forehead and tapping of the forehead, actually like brings on like starts to prep the delta waves for sleep. So there's all of these little wisdoms that if you think about when you want to soothe your kid or even you soothe yourself, we often want to touch the top of our forehead, taking breaths, or, even those little moments of releasing tension and getting your kid to wiggle their body and, move their wrists and ankles. And what are those little micro things that you can both be doing to release some tension before bed, wherever tension is sitting? And a lot of this is about meeting your child's needs just with where they're at. And this can feel really tough when you don't have a lot of resource yourself as a parent. I know there was a parent in our program, Dana, who she was coming to our coaching calls and saying, oh, my little one just wants me. She wants to co-sleep. She wants to co-sleep and we really want our own sleep. And I went, look, I can't remember off the top of my head, maybe it was like 6 or 7. Let's just meet her needs for a week or two and see what happens. Lots of reassurance, lots of cuddles, did the, routines. And rather than trying to pop her in bed because she was just getting up and coming to their room anyway at 2-3 o'clock, said, let's just try putting her to sleep in your bed. And if you're willing, do the co-sleep or the mattress on the ground. And so they just met her need and went, okay, this is what you need right now. Let's just give it a practice. And in less than 2 weeks, it just recalibrated whatever needed to in her system in the attachment anxiety she was experiencing. And she was in her own bed and she had not done that in months.
Which is amazing.
I was like, not saying it's going to be magic for everyone, but it was like we met her needs. She had to just do whatever she needed to feel really secure in her attachment and in herself, and just toddled off to her own bed in 2 weeks with very little. It was really interesting. Sometimes
I think it's great because my little son, he has a lot more sort of bad dreams than my older son, and he was going through a stage where he was just scared constantly in his bedroom, and so we put a mattress on the floor, and me and my husband said to each other, when he's 18 and he's going off to college, he is not going to be wanting to sleep in our room. Our 14-year-old, almost 15-year-old Oliver, he could not, he doesn't even want to say goodnight to us anymore. Like, he says goodnight to us, but he's like, he goes off to his room, after dinner, and then we don't see him for the rest of the night. So like by that time, we've got such a short period of that window with our little one, now only probably a few years, and he's definitely not going to be wanting to sleep with us. But if that's where he is right now, that's where he is right now, and that's okay.
Yeah. And so some of that's such a great example, is how do we as parents just reconcile and come to some acceptance of this is the reality right now. Yeah. And sometimes it is not a reality we want to be in. Mm-hmm. And it's okay to acknowledge any stress, frustration, whatever is happening for us as parents, and move through some of that. I know from speaking for myself, but a lot of parents I work with, there can be so much stress at bedtime because it's like we just want them to go to bed because we want our time or we want our space. And we've put all of everything into, if I don't get this 1 hour of wind down time myself as a parent, the world's going to end. And it had to take a lot of kind of acceptance and acknowledgement around this is where we're at.
Yeah.
And it's how do we let go of the need to control what bedtimes look like right now? Because if we can do this for them, it will save us actually time in the long run.
It definitely will. And that's everything that you teach, Ashley. And, and same with me, I suppose. It's like we want to do some hard yards in the beginning because it will turn around and, it will get better. It will get easier. It will go back to normal. And it's like, bringing in some of these dietary changes. Yeah, it's really hard at first, but you'll turn around in, 5 or 6 weeks' time. And you're like, oh, this is part of our new life. This is our new normal. We don't feel it anymore. It's not an issue. Same as this, putting in a little bit of effort up front might seem counterintuitive, or that, this is not what you want and this is feeding into the problem, but it isn't. I love that story that you shared there. Look, Let's quickly touch on some sort of natural ways that we can support sleep. I talk a lot, obviously, about inflammation and how we reduce that inflammation. Just some things that naturally can help sleep. I find really great for kiddos is magnesium baths. Not only do they sort of help calm the body, because magnesium is really calming, it helps reduce anxiety. It also helps detoxification. It also helps reduce that inflammation. So you're not only just bringing in that as a calming tool, but also helping other areas as well. I do want to say with magnesium baths, you are raising the temperature of the body. So you don't want to do it too close to bedtime. I sort of find at least sort of an hour and a half before bedtime, but building in that to the routine that you were suggesting is a great way.
Yeah. Yeah. And other, especially kiddos, as you said, doing that a little bit further away from bedtime. If in fight mode, or if they're in real anxiety through a lot of the day, sometimes actually a shower can be a bit of a better calming than a bath, just in terms of what it does to the nervous system. So I don't know what your advice or thoughts are, Dan. I hear a lot about magnesium sprays and oils for the bottom of kids' feet. Like if they can't get them in the bathtub, are there other?
Yeah. Look, sprays are great, and it's the same with the bath. Like I think you still need a supplement with magnesium in just because you won't get enough through a bath or through a spray. But magnesium bisglycinate in particular is really good for nighttime in calming the body, soothing the muscles, calming that anxiety. But it really, as I said earlier, a lot of the natural stuff around it that can help overall might seem like it has nothing to do with sleep, but it affects sleep so much. And that's definitely those gut health. You want to make sure that gut-brain connection, making sure there's no worms, like we mentioned, the parasites. In terms of other natural supplements, there's always these sort of herbal, tinctures, lemon balm's really good for that. What about melatonin? I find melatonin okay to use in short bursts if you really need to, but you do not want to get into the habit of using it every day. You don't want it to affect your own, your kids' levels of melatonin. But if we bring it back to how do we get to raise our own melatonin levels? Serotonin is a precursor to melatonin. Serotonin is made in the gut. Make sure your gut is functioning well. And then also those circadian rhythms, like we talked about earlier, that blue light, taking it away. Our kids should not be on media devices at least 1 to 2 hours before bed. Bringing in that red light, resetting the circadian rhythms in the morning with that sunlight.
Yeah. Yeah. And is there any I always hear people talk about like particular foods that can increase your serotonin or melatonin and things as well.
Yeah, so pistachio nuts are really good. But the thing is that the thing with it's funny, like you'll see these trends that go around on TikTok, and everyone will like, oh, you can eat, pistachio nuts. They're going to help, naturally produce melatonin. The amount of pistachio nuts that you need to eat to produce that right amount of melatonin, definitely not possible. So yes, it can. Turkey, really things like that is another good one to help produce that serotonin, that melatonin. But it's just feeding the body what it needs. There's not going to be a food that's going to be like, yes, this is going to help with sleep. And any of those, you've got the amount that you'd have to eat for it to actually, do
and anything. Especially, I'd imagine if there's gut health that needs to be worked out. As I mentioned earlier, for my little one, until we worked out what her intolerances were and what was inflaming her gut, we had to work that out. Those main ones that you talk about, we had to totally cut dairy, gluten, soy. And then we would know if that creeped into the diet that we'd have a night where she'd be tossing, turning and kicking and awake more. So it's like if the gut isn't where it needs to be, we know it sends those messages to the brain and the nervous system.
It does. Well, we have discussed a lot here today, Ashley. I think this has been a great podcast on sleep, and I love your insights, and I love the different perspective that you bring, because we've had a sleep expert on here before, but it was this is more focused on what that body, that dysregulated body, what that nervous system needs to really, really calm down and get ready for sleep. Ashley, please tell listeners where they can find and follow you online.
Oh, so you can follow me on the ADHD Thrive Institute Instagram. Yeah. And I believe in this podcast, there should be a link for our parenting resource freebies. So have a look for that.
Yeah, definitely.
And you can hear me more on the podcast as well. Check out all the old episodes if you're a new listener.
Yes, the old episodes are fantastic. So definitely go and check those out. Ashley, thank you so much again for joining us and sharing your knowledge and your expertise. Until next time, listeners, thank you for tuning into this week's episode of The Soaring Child. I'm Dana Kay, your ADHD health practitioner. Keep on thriving. Thank you for listening to the Soaring Child podcast today. To learn more about how to help your child with ADHD soar using natural strategies, visit our website at adhdthriveinstitute.com and follow us on social media at ADHD Thrive Institute.